The hotel Heir discovers hidden secrets disguised as a beggar. The unexpected discovery almost reveals his true identity. A disguised experience exposes failings in service. A new idea completely changes the events at the hotel. Millionaire disguises himself as homeless man. In his own hotel, the rich heir is surprised by how he's treated. Subscribe for more exciting stories. On a sunny autumn morning in New York City, the luxurious Imperial Palace Hotel stood imposingly among the skyscrapers of Fifth Avenue. Ethan Blackwell, the 32-year-old heir to the largest luxury hotel chain in the United States, observed the 45-story building from across the street, wearing tattered clothes and a disheveled wig that made him unrecognizable. Graduated in hospitality from Cornell and with an MBA from Harvard, Ethan had always been known for his discretion and peculiar management methodology. After 3 years managing the international units of the chain, he had returned to the US with a personal mission: to assess whether the legacy of excellence in hospitality, built by 3 generations of his family, still remained intact. The Imperial Palace was not just another unit of the Blackwell chain. It was the hotel where his grandfather, Anthony Blackwell, started as a messenger at 14, until he managed to buy it decades later, transforming it into the seed of the hotel empire he built. The Art Deco walls held stories of perseverance that Ethan had heard since childhood, and now more than ever, he felt the responsibility to honor that heritage. In recent months, the hotel's online reviews had shown a significant drop, especially in matters related to customer service. Ethan could have simply called a meeting with the board, but he preferred a more direct approach. He wanted to experience himself how employees treated people when they thought no one important was watching. Adjusting his fake beard and making sure the hidden microphone in his clothes was working, Ethan crossed the street. His heart raced when the automatic doors opened, revealing the sumptuous lobby lined with Italian marble. The crystal chandeliers, which had fascinated him so much in childhood, still shone majestically, but it was the behavior of the people working under that light that interested him now. At the reception desk, 3 attendants were talking among themselves, apparently engrossed in personal matters. Ethan approached slowly, observing how it took a few seconds until they noticed his presence. The first to notice him was Sophie Adams, a 26-year-old recently promoted to senior receptionist. "May I help you?" she asked, with a genuine smile that contrasted with the uncomfortable expressions of her colleagues, Richard and Mark. "I'd like information about the presidential suites," Ethan replied, maintaining a hunched posture and deliberately hoarse voice. Richard let out a contained laugh while Mark intervened. "Sir, perhaps the hostel on 14th Street would be more suitable for your profile." Before Ethan could respond, Sophie politely interrupted. "The presidential suites occupy the 40th to 45th floors, sir. We have different categories starting at $15,000 per night. May I show you our digital catalog?" Ethan noticed how she maintained professionalism, even when Richard and Mark exchanged mocking glances. Sophie continued presenting the options, explaining in detail each facility offered, from the 24-hour butler service to the private helipad. "Mrs. Elizabeth Blackwell, who founded our hospitality school, always said that true hospitality doesn't distinguish appearances," Sophie commented when her colleagues moved away to attend to other guests. She personally trained the first generation of employees at this hotel. Ethan felt a lump in his throat upon hearing the mention of his grandmother. Elizabeth, Anthony's wife, had transformed a simple internal service course into one of the most respected hospitality schools in the country. Apparently, at least one person at that reception still remembered her teachings. After 40 minutes of detailed presentation, Ethan thanked her and left the hotel, leaving Sophie intrigued by that unusual visit. Across the street, inside a van equipped with monitors, Charlie Mendez, executive president of the chain and close friend of the Blackwell family, waited with a worried expression. "So, Ethan, what did you think?" "Exactly what we suspected, Charlie. The palace is sick, but we've found the antidote." Ethan removed the wig and fake beard while watching the service recording on the monitors. "That receptionist, Sophie Adams, I need her complete history with the company." "I've already provided it," replied Charlie, handing over a folder. "Graduated in hospitality from your grandmother's school, top of her class. Started as an intern 4 years ago." Ethan smiled, leafing through the file. "Prepare everything for tomorrow." I'm going to make an official visit to the hotel, but first, I want you to execute some changes I've planned. As the van moved away from Fifth Avenue, Ethan couldn't get out of his head the way Sophie had quoted his grandmother. In an increasingly automated and impersonal world, perhaps that was exactly what the Imperial Palace needed. Someone who still believed in hospitality as an art, not just as a business. What he didn't know was that that morning would change not only the fate of the hotel, but also his own life in a way he could never have imagined. The next morning, the Imperial Palace was buzzing with news of the heir's surprise visit. Ethan Blackwell, now impeccably dressed in a navy blue Italian suit, observed the frantic movement of employees through security cameras, temporarily installed in the manager's office. Robert Myers, general manager of the hotel for 15 years, tried to disguise his nervousness while organizing an emergency meeting with the team. The negative reviews of recent months weighed on his conscience, and young Blackwell's presence at the hotel meant that changes were coming. In the lobby, Sophie organized the reception as on any other day, oblivious to the buzz that was forming. Her colleagues, Richard and Mark, on the other hand, whispered nervously, trying to guess the reason for the surprise visit. The atmosphere of apprehension was palpable. "Miss Adams," called Robert, approaching the counter. "Mr. Blackwell requested your presence at the 9 o'clock meeting." Sophie frowned, confused. "Me? But isn't that meeting just for management?" "Apparently not anymore," Robert replied, checking his wristwatch for the third time in less than a minute. At 9 o'clock sharp, the meeting room on the 38th floor was full. Ethan occupied the head of the table, flanked by Charlie Mendez and Robert Myers. Sophie, seated near the door, felt out of place among the executives. "Good morning, everyone," Ethan began, his firm voice echoing through the room. "Yesterday I had an interesting experience at this hotel." He paused, his eyes meeting Sophie's. "I came in disguise, as a homeless man, to assess how our team treats people who don't seem to fit the palace standard." The silence that followed was deafening. Sophie's eyes widened, remembering the man from the day before. Robert paled while the other managers exchanged worried glances. "Miss Adams," Ethan continued, "your conduct yesterday was exemplary. The only person in the entire reception who maintained the professionalism and courtesy that my grandparents valued so much." Sophie felt her face burn. The pieces fit together in her mind: the homeless man's genuine interest in the hotel's history, the specific questions about procedures, the detailed knowledge about the Blackwell family. "From today," Ethan proceeded, "we will implement significant changes at the palace. Miss Adams will be promoted to Supervisor of Service and Hospitality, with autonomy to restructure our frontline team." Robert cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Mr. Blackwell, with all due respect, Sophie is very young and that's exactly what we need," Ethan interrupted. "New blood with old values. Someone who understands that hospitality has no relation to the guest's appearance or the content of their bank account." Charlie Mendez distributed folders containing the new training program. Sophie leafed through the material, impressed with the scope of the proposed changes. Her heart was racing with the mixture of pride and apprehension. "As for the employees who demonstrated inappropriate behavior," Ethan continued, "they will be formally warned and will undergo retraining. Miss Adams will decide after the training period who remains on the team." The meeting continued for 2 more hours, with discussions about implementing the changes and goals for the coming months. When everyone began to leave, Ethan asked Sophie to stay. "I know it's a lot to process," he said as soon as they were alone, "but I saw something rare in you today: genuine compassion and unwavering professionalism." Sophie adjusted herself in the chair, gathering courage. "Why not fire the employees who acted badly?" "Because my grandmother Elizabeth always said it's more valuable to transform than to punish," Ethan smiled. "Besides, I need someone who knows the team well to lead this transformation, someone who still believes in the power of true hospitality." At that moment, Sophie realized that her life was about to change completely. What she didn't know was that this promotion would be just the beginning of a much greater journey. At the end of the day, while organizing her new office, Sophie found an old hotel protocol book, handwritten by Elizabeth Blackwell. On the first page, an underlined phrase caught her attention. "True hospitality is born from the heart and transcends any protocol." Ethan, observing her discreetly through the half-open door, smiled. Perhaps finally, he had found someone capable of rescuing not only the spirit of the Imperial Palace, but also of bringing something new and special to his own life. The sun had not yet risen when Sophie arrived at the Imperial Palace on her first day as a supervisor. Wearing an elegant navy blue suit, a gift from her mother to celebrate the promotion, she took a deep breath before crossing the hotel's revolving doors. The lobby, illuminated only by the low lights of dawn, seemed different from that perspective. It was no longer just her workplace, but a space that was now under her responsibility. On the walls, the portraits of the founders seemed to observe her with expectation, especially that of Elizabeth Blackwell, whose serene expression conveyed silent confidence. "You arrived early," a familiar voice surprised her. Ethan emerged from the elevator corridor, carrying a stack of documents. "Couldn't sleep either." Sophie smiled, embarrassed. "I confess I spent the night reviewing the training materials. I want to start on the right foot. Come with me." Ethan gestured towards the hotel restaurant. "The staff breakfast hasn't started yet, but I convinced Chef Paul to prepare something for us." In the still empty restaurant, the aroma of fresh coffee and freshly baked bread filled the air. Chef Paul, a grey-haired gentleman who had been working at the hotel for 3 decades, greeted them with a warm smile and a specially prepared table near the windows overlooking Fifth Avenue. "You know, Sophie," Ethan began as they served themselves, "there's a special reason why I chose you for this position. It wasn't just for your exemplary service that day." Sophie raised her eyes from the coffee cup, intrigued. "My grandmother Elizabeth kept a diary about all the students who passed through the hospitality school. I found her notes about you." He pulled out a small red-covered notebook from the folder. She wrote, "Young Sophie reminds me very much of myself at 20. She sees hospitality not as a service, but as an art of making people feel at home even when they're far from it." Sophie's eyes watered. Elizabeth had passed away during her last year at school, and those words were like an unexpected gift from the past. "I have a proposal for you," Ethan continued. "In addition to supervising the service, I'd like you to develop a new training program. Something that combines the palace's traditional values with a modern approach." "That's a huge responsibility," Sophie replied thoughtfully, "and it's just the beginning. If it works here, we intend to implement it throughout the chain." The rest of breakfast was dedicated to discussing ideas and strategies. Sophie surprised Ethan with her innovative vision on how to modernize service without losing the essence of personalized attention. At 7 a.m. sharp, Sophie conducted her first meeting with the reception team. Richard and Mark, visibly uncomfortable, sat at the back of the training room. "From today," she began, her voice firmer than she thought she was capable of, "we will begin a new phase at the Imperial Palace. We are not just offering luxurious rooms, we are providing unforgettable experiences." During the presentation of the new program, Sophie noticed skeptical looks transforming into expressions of interest. Her passion for the work was contagious, and even the most resistant began to pay attention. "For our first practical activity," she announced, "each of you will spend an entire day as a guest in different hotels in the city. We need to understand the experience from the other side of the counter." The idea caused a buzz in the room. Ethan, who was discreetly watching through the half-open door, smiled in approval. At the end of the day, while organizing reports in her new office, Sophie received an unexpected visit. It was Mrs. Johnson, the hotel's oldest housekeeper, carrying an old box. "I found this while tidying up the storage room," said the lady, placing the box on the desk. "They're old records from the hotel's early years. I thought it might interest you." Inside the box, Sophie found old photographs, records of illustrious guests and, to her surprise, a procedures manual handwritten by Anthony and Elizabeth Blackwell. As she leafed through those historical documents, Sophie didn't notice Ethan standing at the door, observing her with a look that mixed professional admiration and something more, something he himself still couldn't define. The Imperial Palace was about to enter a new era, and Sophie would be the bridge between the glorious past and a promising future. What no one could predict was that this transformation would affect much more than just the hotel's procedures. The following weeks at the Imperial Palace were marked by intense activity. Sophie's training program was in full swing, bringing visible changes to the hotel's dynamics. The once silent corridors now echoed with animated discussions about service techniques and case studies. One morning, Sophie was conducting a role-playing session in the lobby, with employees simulating various service situations. Ethan, who was discreetly observing from afar, couldn't help but notice how she commanded the group with a perfect mix of authority and empathy. "Remember," Sophie was saying, "every guest has a story. Our mission is to be part of that story in a positive way, even if only for one night." Richard, who had initially shown resistance to the changes, surprised everyone by volunteering for a challenging simulation, dealing with an angry guest. His performance demonstrated a remarkable improvement in his communication and empathy skills. At the end of the session, Ethan approached the group. "Impressive, Sophie. You've achieved in weeks what we've been trying to do for years." Sophie blushed slightly at the compliment, but maintained her professional composure. "It's the team's merit, Mr. Blackwell. They're really embracing the idea." As the group dispersed, Ethan invited Sophie for a conversation in his office. On the way, they passed by the hotel restaurant, where Chef Paul was conducting a tasting with the waitstaff, part of Sophie's new initiative for all employees to deeply know the services offered. In the office, Ethan got straight to the point. "The numbers don't lie, Sophie. Guest ratings have improved significantly in the last month. The board is impressed and wants to expand the program to other units of the chain." Sophie felt a mix of pride and apprehension. "That's wonderful, but we still have a lot of work to do here." "That's why I want to propose something," Ethan continued, leaning over the desk. "I'd like you to lead the implementation of the program at a national level. It would mean traveling a lot, training teams in different cities." Before Sophie could respond, they were interrupted by an urgent knock on the door. It was Charlie Mendez, the executive president, with a worried expression. "Ethan, we have a problem," he said, casting a hesitant glance at Sophie. "I think we'd better discuss this in private." Ethan made a reassuring gesture. "Sophie can stay." "What happened?" Charlie sighed deeply before continuing. "I just received a call from the legal department. There are serious accusations against the hotel circulating in the press. Allegations of unethical practices, differential treatment based on social class, even bribery to obtain positive reviews." The silence that followed was heavy. Sophie felt her stomach sink while Ethan stood up, visibly disturbed. "This is absurd," he exclaimed. "We've been implementing exactly the opposite in recent months. Where are these accusations coming from?" "The sources are anonymous," Charlie replied, "but they seem to be from inside the hotel." The journalist mentioned employees dissatisfied with recent changes. Sophie couldn't contain her reaction. It's sabotage. After all the progress we've made." Ethan placed a comforting hand on Sophie's shoulder. "We'll solve this. Charlie, schedule an emergency meeting with the board and legal. Sophie, please stand by. We'll need you to better understand what's happening on the ground." As Charlie hurriedly left, Ethan turned to Sophie. "Don't let this shake your confidence. The work you're doing is vital to the future of the palace." Sophie nodded, determined, but inside she felt shaken. The accusations were a hard blow not only to the hotel, but to everything she believed in and had been fighting for. As she left the office, Sophie noticed furtive glances and whispers among some employees in the corridor. The news seemed to be spreading quickly. She took a deep breath, knowing that the next few days would be a crucial test not only for the program she had developed, but for her own leadership and integrity. As she walked back to her office, Sophie couldn't help but wonder who could be behind these accusations and why. One thing was certain: she wouldn't let months of hard work and progress be destroyed by lies and sabotage. The Imperial Palace, which had recently been in a moment of renaissance, now faced its biggest crisis in years. And in the midst of this storm, Sophie found herself not only fighting for the future of the hotel, but also for her own place in it. The days that followed at the Imperial Palace were tense. News of the accusations against the hotel spread quickly, creating an atmosphere of distrust and apprehension among the staff. Sophie, determined to keep team morale high, split herself between her usual responsibilities and crisis meetings with the board. On a particularly stressful afternoon, Sophie was in her office reviewing reports when she heard a hesitant knock on the door. It was Lucy, one of the hotel's longest-serving housekeepers. "Miss Sophie, can I talk to you for a minute?" Lucy asked, visibly nervous. Sophie nodded, indicating a chair. "Of course, Lucy, what's wrong?" Lucy hesitated for a moment before starting. "It's about these accusations. I think I know who might be behind this." Sophie's heart raced. "Go on, please." "A few weeks ago, I overheard a conversation between Mark and a man I had never seen before. They were on the 30th floor terrace. thinking no one could hear them. The man was talking about bringing down the palace from the inside out and mentioned something about a competing chain. Sophie felt a mix of shock and relief, finally a concrete lead. "Lucy, are you sure about this? It's a very serious accusation." "Absolutely, miss. In fact," Lucy hesitated again, "I took a picture of them with my cell phone. I was afraid to speak up before, but I can't stay quiet anymore seeing what's happening to the hotel." After thanking Lucy for her courage, Sophie immediately contacted Ethan and Charlie. Within minutes, they were all gathered in Ethan's office, analyzing the photo and discussing the next steps. "I recognize that man," said Charlie, pointing to the image. "It's Ryan Alvarez, an executive from the Stellar Hotels chain. They've been trying to enter the New York market for years." Ethan, with a serious expression, made a decision. "Sophie, I need you to lead a discreet internal investigation. Talk to trusted employees, review access records, anything that can give us more evidence." In the following days, Sophie immersed herself in the investigation. Working tirelessly, she uncovered a series of inconsistencies in Mark's records, strange accesses to restricted areas, suspicious communications, and even discrepancies in financial reports. One night, while reviewing security cameras, Sophie made a shocking discovery. In the footage, she clearly saw Mark handing what appeared to be a folder of documents to Ryan Alvarez in a discreet corner of the hotel parking lot. With substantial evidence in hand, Sophie, Ethan, and Charlie confronted Mark in a tense meeting. Initially, he denied everything, but faced with irrefutable proof, he crumbled and confessed. "Stellar offered me a director position and a significant amount," admitted Mark, head down. "They wanted inside information, and for me to create problems to tarnish the palace's reputation." Mark's confession was a bittersweet moment. On one hand, it relieved the pressure on the hotel and its team. On the other, it was painful to see how one employee's greed could have destroyed the hard work of so many. Ethan, demonstrating the same compassion that Sophie admired, decided not to press criminal charges against Mark, opting for a discreet dismissal and a confidentiality agreement. "We don't want any more negative publicity," he explained. "Our focus now is to repair the damage and move forward." With the crisis under control, Ethan called a press conference. Sophie, by his side, watched with admiration as he skillfully presented the evidence of sabotage, reaffirming the palace's commitment to ethics and service excellence. After the conference, as they walked through the hotel corridors, Ethan stopped and turned to Sophie. "You were amazing throughout this whole situation. I don't know what we would have done without you." Sophie, feeling her face flush, smiled. "I just did what was right for the hotel and for you." There was a moment of emotion-laden silence between them. Ethan took a step forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "Sophie, But before he could finish, they were interrupted by Charlie, who came running down the corridor with news about the positive repercussions of the press conference. The moment passed, but something had changed. Sophie and Ethan exchanged a look that said more than words could express. Both knew that their relationship had evolved beyond the professional, but what this would mean for the future of the palace and for themselves was yet to be discovered. As they returned to their respective offices, Sophie reflected on the emotional roller coaster of the past few weeks. The crisis had been overcome, but new challenges and possibilities were presenting themselves on the horizon. The Imperial Palace was about to enter a new chapter in its history, and Sophie was at the center of this transformation, both professionally and personally. The weeks following the revelation of the sabotage were filled with intense activity at the Imperial Palace. The team, now more united than ever, worked tirelessly to restore the hotel's reputation and implement the changes proposed by Sophie. On a sunny morning, Sophie was conducting a meeting with department heads in the hotel's elegant event hall. The atmosphere was one of cautious optimism, with everyone focused on discussing strategies for the future. "Our resilience during the crisis showed the true spirit of the palace," Sophie began, her voice full of conviction. "Now it's time to transform this experience into something positive." Richard, the receptionist who had previously resisted changes, was now one of the most enthusiastic. "How about a mentoring program? Experienced employees guiding newcomers, sharing the hotel's history and values." Sophie smiled, pleased with the suggestion. "Excellent idea, Richard. This will help strengthen our internal culture." The meeting continued with a flurry of innovative ideas, from a personalized app for guests to partnerships with local artists to decorate rooms with contemporary American art. At the end of the session, Sophie felt invigorated. The palace wasn't just recovering, it was reinventing itself. Leaving the meeting, she met Ethan in the corridor. Since the interrupted moment after the press conference, there had been a palpable tension between them, a mix of undeclared attraction and professional hesitation. "Sophie, can I talk to you for a moment?" asked Ethan, his tone more personal than usual. They headed to a small inner garden of the hotel, an oasis of tranquility amidst the urban bustle. Ethan seemed nervous, something rare for someone usually so composed. "First, I want to thank you again for everything you've done," he began. "But there's something else I need to say." Sophie's heart raced, anticipating what might come next. Ethan continued, "In these past few months, working so closely with you, I realized that—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I realized that my feelings for you go beyond professional admiration." Sophie felt her face heat up. "Ethan, Wait, please," he gently interrupted. "I know this can complicate things considering our positions at the hotel, but I can no longer ignore what I feel." Sophie took a deep breath, gathering courage. "I've been feeling something similar," she admitted. "But you're right, it's a delicate situation." They stood in silence for a moment, the sound of the garden fountain filling the air between them. "Maybe," Ethan suggested hesitantly, "we can explore this calmly. No pressure, respecting our professional roles." Sophie nodded, a shy smile forming on her lips. "I think we can try." The moment was interrupted by the sound of Ethan's cell phone. It was Charlie with urgent news about a possible expansion of the chain to the West Coast. Returning to the reality of their responsibilities, Sophie and Ethan exchanged a look of mutual understanding before separating to attend to their respective obligations. In the days that followed, the Imperial Palace vibrated with new energy. The ideas discussed in the meeting began to take shape. The mentoring program was launched with great success, with veteran employees proudly sharing their experiences. Sophie, now more confident in her position, led the implementation of changes with a mix of enthusiasm and pragmatism. She knew that the hotel's success depended on the balance between innovation and tradition. One afternoon, while supervising the installation of a new art exhibition in the lobby, Sophie received an unexpected visit. It was Mrs. Johnson, the old housekeeper, accompanied by a group of retired former hotel employees. "We came to see the changes with our own eyes," said Mrs. Johnson, looking around with approval, "and I must say I'm impressed. You've managed to bring back the spirit of old Anthony Blackwell." The old lady's words deeply moved Sophie. It was the final validation that they were on the right track. That night, in a small celebration with the team in the hotel restaurant, Sophie observed the animated group with a sense of accomplishment. The Imperial Palace was being reborn, stronger and truer to its original values than ever. Meanwhile, from across the room, Ethan watched her with a mix of admiration and affection. He knew that together, they were not only rebuilding a hotel, but also laying the foundations for something new and exciting in their personal lives. The future of the Imperial Palace, as well as Sophie and Ethan's, was full of promises and possibilities. The journey of reconstruction and renewal was just beginning, and each day brought new opportunities for growth, both for the hotel and for the people who made it work. The sun had barely risen when Sophie arrived at the Imperial Palace that morning. The hotel was buzzing with a different energy. Today was the official launch day of the new expansion program for the Blackwell chain. In the lobby, a team of decorators was putting the final touches on an elegant banner that announced Imperial Palace, the future of American hospitality. Sophie smiled, remembering the long journey of the past few months. Ethan met her near the reception desk, his face a mixture of enthusiasm and nervousness. "Ready for the big day?" he asked, offering her a cup of coffee. "More than ready," Sophie replied, gratefully accepting the coffee. "I still can't believe we're going to lead the expansion to the West Coast." The decision to expand the Blackwell chain to the West Coast of the United States had been made after weeks of intense discussions and planning. The success of the reformulations at the Imperial Palace in New York had convinced the board that it was time to grow, taking the new concept of hospitality to other regions of the country. The morning passed in a whirlwind of activities. Journalists were arriving for the press conference, executives from other hotel chains were showing up for the networking cocktail, and a team of international consultants was ready to present feasibility studies. At 10 o'clock sharp, Ethan took the podium in the event hall with Sophie by his side. The room was packed with all eyes fixed on them. "Good morning, everyone," Ethan began, his firm voice echoing through the microphone. "Today we are not just announcing the expansion of a hotel chain, we are launching a new era in American hospitality." As Ethan spoke about the expansion plans, Sophie observed the audience's reaction. She saw excited faces, some skeptical, others curious. She knew the challenge ahead was enormous, but she felt prepared. After the initial presentation, it was Sophie's turn to take the floor. With confidence, she detailed the new training program that would be implemented in all units, emphasizing the importance of maintaining the essence of the palace while adapting to regional peculiarities. "Our mission is to create unique experiences that reflect the rich cultural diversity of America," she concluded, receiving an enthusiastic round of applause. The press conference that followed was intense. Journalists fired questions about investments, environmental impact, and market strategies. Sophie and Ethan responded with ease, complementing each other perfectly. At the end of the event, as the guests dispersed, Charlie Mendez approached the couple with a broad smile. "You were spectacular. The board is more than satisfied." But the euphoria of success was briefly interrupted when Jessica, the new marketing manager, ran up to them with a concerned expression. "We have a problem," she said, showing her tablet. "The Stella chain just announced a mega expansion to the West Coast. They're promising bigger investments than ours." The group exchanged apprehensive looks. Stella, the same chain that had tried to sabotage the palace months ago, now seemed determined to compete directly in their new territory. "They're trying to intimidate us," said Ethan, his voice tense. "But we won't back down." Sophie nodded, determined. "We have something they don't, a committed team and an authentic vision of hospitality." In the days that followed, Sophie and Ethan immersed themselves in long, strategic planning sessions. The challenge was not just to expand, but to do so sustainably and true to the palace's values. One afternoon, while reviewing plans for a possible hotel in San Francisco, Sophie noticed Ethan looking thoughtfully out the window. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. Ethan turned to her, a tired smile on his face. "About how everything has changed since you arrived. The hotel, our plans, and us." Sophie felt her heart race. Since the conversation in the garden, they had been carefully navigating the fine line between professional and personal. "Ethan," she began hesitantly, "I know we agreed to take it slow, but—" He approached, taking her hands in his. "But maybe it's time we're honest about what we really want." At that moment, with plans scattered on the table and the future of the Blackwell chain hanging over them, Sophie and Ethan shared their first kiss. It was a moment of tenderness and promise, sealing not just a personal commitment, but also a partnership that promised to transform the American hotel scene. Gently separating, both smiled, aware of the challenges ahead, but confident in their ability to face them together. "So," said Sophie, turning her gaze back to the plans on the table, "how are we going to surprise San Francisco?" Ethan laughed, energized. "With palace style, of course. Let's show the West Coast and Stella what true American hospitality is." As night fell over New York, Sophie and Ethan continued working, their minds buzzing with ideas and possibilities. The Imperial Palace was about to start a new chapter, and they were determined to make it the brightest of all. The future of the Imperial Palace, as well as Sophie and Ethan's, was full of promises and possibilities. The journey of reconstruction and renewal was just beginning, and each day brought new opportunities for growth, both for the hotel and for the people who made it work. Dawn was breaking in San Francisco as Sophie arrived at the construction site of the future Palace San Francisco. The building, still under construction, already displayed traces of the characteristic elegance of the Blackwell chain, blended with elements of local architecture. Sophie took a deep breath, feeling the cool, salty air of the city. In recent weeks, she had been dividing her time between New York and San Francisco, personally overseeing every stage of the project. "Good morning, Miss Sophie," greeted Mr. Johnson, the construction foreman, a middle-aged gentleman with a warm smile typical of the West Coast. "Today we're going to start installing the solar panels. The hotel will be an example of sustainability." Sophie smiled, satisfied. Sustainability was one of the pillars of the new palace, a direct response to the criticism that the hotel industry had been receiving about environmental impact. As she walked through the site, Sophie received a video call from Ethan, who was in New York. "Good morning, my love," he said, his smiling face lighting up the screen. "How are things going there?" "Progressing well," Sophie replied. "The solar panels have arrived, and the local team is excited about the hospitality training we started yesterday." Ethan nodded, satisfied. "Great. Things are in full swing here too. The mentoring program you implemented at the Palace, New York, is being such a huge success that other chains are approaching us for consultations." The conversation was interrupted by Jessica, the marketing manager, who appeared breathless next to Sophie. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but you need to see this." Jessica showed her tablet where a flashy headline was blinking. "Stellar Chain announces early opening of resort in Napa Valley." Sophie and Ethan exchanged worried looks through the screen. Stellar, their main competitor, seemed determined to establish itself on the West Coast before them. "We can't let ourselves be intimidated," said Ethan, his voice firm. "Our focus is quality, not speed." Sophie agreed, but couldn't help feeling a twinge of concern. The competition was fierce, and every move seemed crucial. In the weeks that followed, the Palace team worked tirelessly. Sophie led intensive training sessions, emphasizing the importance of incorporating local culture into the chain's standard of excellence. One day, during one of these sessions, Sophie had an inspiring idea. "What if," she proposed to the team, "we created a partnership program with local artisans? We could display and sell their works in the hotel, promoting Californian culture." The suggestion was received with enthusiasm. Soon, the Palace San Francisco was collaborating with winemakers, tech startups, and artists from the Bay Area, transforming the hotel into a true showcase of local innovation and culture. Meanwhile, Ethan coordinated efforts in New York, negotiating with suppliers and ensuring that every detail was aligned with the vision of the new palace. The distance was a challenge for the couple, but they made sure to maintain daily contact, sharing not only professional updates but also personal moments. One night, after a long day of work, Sophie was walking along the beach in Santa Monica, phone in hand connected with Ethan via video. "I miss you," she said, watching the sunset reflected in the calm waters. Ethan smiled, his face softening on the screen. "I miss you too. But look on the bright side. When the hotel opens, we'll have the perfect excuse for frequent visits to San Francisco." Sophie laughed, feeling her heart lighten. It was in these moments that she remembered why all the effort was worth it. As the inauguration date approached, the tension increased. The team worked day and night to ensure everything was perfect. Sophie personally supervised every detail, from the room decor to the restaurant menu, which fused international cuisine with Californian flavors. Finally, on the eve of the grand opening, Ethan arrived in San Francisco. Seeing Sophie in the still under-construction lobby, he couldn't contain a smile of pride and admiration. "You did it," he said, embracing her. "This is more incredible than we could have imagined." Sophie returned the hug, feeling the fatigue of the last few months dissipate. "We did it," she corrected. "This is the result of the entire team's work." That night, at an intimate dinner overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, Ethan surprised Sophie with a small velvet box. "I know it's not the most conventional moment," he said, opening the box to reveal a delicate ring, "but nothing in our journey has been conventional. Sophie, will you marry me?" With tears in her eyes, Sophie nodded, words escaping her in that moment of pure emotion. The couple sealed their engagement with a kiss, the San Francisco skyline as a silent witness to their love and commitment, not just to each other, but to the dream they were building together. Tomorrow would be the big day, the inauguration of the Palace San Francisco. But that night, under the stars of the California sky, Sophie and Ethan celebrated not just a professional milestone, but also the beginning of a new chapter in their personal lives. The Palace San Francisco was about to open its doors, symbolizing not just the expansion of a hotel chain, but the realization of a shared dream, built on foundations of love, respect, and an unwavering vision of genuine hospitality. The dawn in San Francisco brought with it an atmosphere of expectation and nervousness. The Palace San Francisco, gleaming in its architecture that blended the classic with the contemporary, was ready for its grand debut. Sophie, standing on the terrace of the top floor, watched the city wake up, feeling the weight of responsibility and the excitement of the moment. Ethan joined her, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Ready to make history?" he asked, his contagious smile calming Sophie's nerves. "More than ever," she replied, gently squeezing his hand. The hotel lobby was a whirlwind of activity. Employees adjusted the final details, florists positioned elaborate arrangements of native Californian flowers, and Chef Michael, brought specially from New York, gave final instructions to his team in the kitchen. At 10 o'clock sharp, the doors of the Palace San Francisco officially opened. A crowd was anxiously waiting, including local authorities, journalists, influencers, and the first guests selected for the opening night. Sophie and Ethan, impeccable in their formal attire, welcomed the guests with warm smiles. The governor of California was the first to enter, praising the hotel's initiative in promoting local culture and generating jobs in the region. The opening ceremony was a spectacle of colors and sounds. A local jazz band performed in the lobby, filling the environment with the contagious energy of San Francisco's music scene. Local artisans, partners in the project, proudly displayed their works in a dedicated space on the mezzanine. During her speech, Sophie highlighted the palace's commitment to sustainability and the local community. "This hotel is not just a commercial enterprise," she declared. "It's a bridge between cultures, a showcase of the best that California has to offer, and an example of how tourism can be a positive force for sustainable development." Ethan, in turn, announced the launch of a scholarship program for local youth interested in hospitality, an initiative that was received with enthusiastic applause. As guests explored the hotel's facilities, Sophie noticed a group of stellar executives among the crowd. They observed everything with critical looks, clearly evaluating the competition. "Don't worry about them," Ethan whispered, noticing Sophie's tension. "They can copy our structure, but they can't replicate our soul." As the day progressed, it became clear that the Palace San Francisco was more than just another luxury hotel. It was an immersive experience in Californian culture. The main restaurant, with a panoramic view of the bay, served dishes that fused haute cuisine techniques with local ingredients. The spa offered treatments inspired by Native American rituals, using natural products from the region. A particularly emotional moment occurred when Mrs. Johnson, the former housekeeper of the Palace New York, now retired, arrived as a surprise. She had insisted on traveling to see the realization of the project that Sophie talked about so much. "My dear," said Mrs. Johnson, hugging Sophie with tears in her eyes, "you have not only continued the Blackwell legacy, you have elevated it to new heights." At night, during the gala dinner, Sophie and Ethan had a moment to reflect on the journey that brought them here. From a dedicated receptionist and an heir in search of purpose, they had transformed into a dynamic force, revolutionizing not just a hotel, but an entire approach to hospitality. "You know," said Ethan, raising his glass in a private toast, "when I first saw you at that reception in New York, I never imagined we'd be here today." Sophie smiled, remembering the homeless man who had changed her life. Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it? As guests danced and celebrated, Sophie slipped away for a moment to the terrace. Up there, under the starry San Francisco sky, she finally allowed the realization of the moment to hit her full force. Tears of joy and relief ran down her face. Ethan found her there, enveloping her in an embrace from behind. "We did it, my love," he whispered. "Yes," she replied, turning to face him, "And this is just the beginning." At that moment, with the city of San Francisco shining below them and the distant sound of celebration echoing from the ballroom, Sophie and Ethan sealed their triumph with a passionate kiss. It was the perfect ending to one chapter and the promising beginning of many others. The Palace San Francisco was not just a hotel, it was a symbol of transformation, of dreams realized and of a bright future. And for Sophie and Ethan, it was living proof that with passion, dedication, and heart in the right place, it's possible not only to build an empire but also to find love and purpose along the way. As they returned to the party, hand in hand and hearts full, they knew that together they were ready to face any challenge the future might bring. The Palace San Francisco was more than a commercial success. It was the beginning of a legacy that would last for generations.